Love built a castle, heartbreak left it empty for 73 years, and somewhere in between, the American dream became America's most haunting monument to what could have been. This is the story of Boldt Castle, and trust me, you're not ready for where this goes. Picture this, it's 1900. The Gilded Age is in full swing. Rockefeller's buying up oil fields like they're baseball cards. Carnegie's building libraries. And on a tiny heart-shaped island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, one man is about to spend the equivalent of $200 million in today's money to build his wife the ultimate Valentine's Day card. Except it's a 6-story, 120-room Rhineland castle complete with tunnels, a powerhouse, and its own island. Because when you're George Boldt, assistant dishwasher turned owner of the most famous hotel in New York, you don't do things halfway. But here's the thing about fairy tales. They have a nasty habit of ending right before reality shows up. And reality? Reality showed up with a telegram. Let's rewind, because you can't understand the tragedy without understanding the dream. And you can't understand George Boldt without understanding what it meant to arrive in America in 1864 with nothing but the clothes on your back and a name nobody could pronounce correctly. Georg Boldt was 13 when he left Prussia. Not George, Georg. He'd Americanize it later because that's what you did if you wanted to stop being invisible. He landed in New York with his family, probably on one of those ships where you prayed you wouldn't catch typhoid before seeing the Statue of Liberty. Spoiler alert, the Statue of Liberty wasn't even there yet. It wouldn't show up for another 22 years. That's how early to the party Georg was. The kid had one skill, hospitality. He'd grown up around hotels in Germany, watching how the wealthy moved through spaces, what made them feel important, what made them open their wallets. So he started as a dishwasher, then a busboy, then kitchen help, climbing that ladder one greasy plate at a time. And here's where the American dream actually kicks in, because unlike 99% of the people scrubbing pots in 1864, Georg had a secret weapon. He was watching, learning, cataloging every detail of how successful people operated. By his early 20s, he'd worked his way up to managing a hotel club in New York. That's where he met her, Louise Carrer. And if you believe in love at first sight, this is where you lean in because George Boldt fell like a ton of bricks. Louise was the daughter of a wealthy family. George was still very much the guy who'd arrived with nothing. But he had something money couldn't buy, ambition that could power a small city. They married in 1877, and here's the thing you need to understand about their relationship. This wasn't some Victorian arrangement where the wife stayed home and painted watercolors. Louise was George's business partner, his confidant, the person who'd taste test every menu, approve every decoration, weigh in on every decision. When George bought the Bellevue Hotel in Philadelphia and turned it into the Bellevue Stratford, Louise was right there, making it the finest hotel in the city. But that was just the opening act. In 1893, George got the opportunity of a lifetime. The Waldorf Hotel in New York needed managing. This wasn't just any hotel. This was the Waldorf, where Vanderbilts and Astors and anyone who was anyone stayed when they were in Manhattan. George took the job and immediately started doing what he did best, elevating everything. Better service, better food, better everything. And when the hotel merged with the Astoria next door to become the Waldorf Astoria, George was running the most famous hotel in America. We're talking about the place that invented Waldorf salad, where Eggs Benedict became a thing, where room service was born. George Boldt didn't just manage a hotel, he invented modern luxury hospitality. He understood something that seems obvious now but was revolutionary then. People don't just want a bed and a meal. They want an experience. They want to feel like royalty. And George? George made them feel like kings. The money started rolling in. Serious money. The kind of money that makes you ask, what do you do when you have everything? And for George, the answer was simple. You give your wife a castle, not a metaphorical one. An actual, honest-to-goodness castle. Now, the Boldts had been vacationing in the Thousand Islands for years. If you've never heard of this place, it's this absurd stretch of the St. Lawrence River between New York and Canada where the river is dotted with exactly 1,864 islands. Yes, someone counted. The area had become a playground for America's richest families, yachts everywhere, summer mansions that people casually called cottages despite having 30 rooms. George and Louise loved it there. It was their escape from the chaos of New York. In 1900, George bought Hart Island, 4 acres of rock and trees shaped like a heart. Convenient, right? But it wasn't heart-shaped enough for George, so he hired 300 workers to reshape the entire island, moved tons of earth, built up the sides, made it more heart-like, because when you're building a monument to your love, you don't cut corners on the symbolism. The castle itself was going to be magnificent. 6 stories, 120 rooms, modeled after Rhineland castles George had seen in his youth. Towers, turrets, stone walls 3 feet thick, a grand ballroom, Italian gardens. It was going to have its own powerhouse on a neighboring island to generate electricity. An actual drawbridge, tunnels connecting different buildings. George was literally building a European castle in upstate New York. But he didn't stop there, because Hart Island was just the centerpiece. He bought neighboring islands too. On one, he built the Ulster Tower, this massive stone structure that looked like something out of medieval Germany, as a playhouse for their children. On another, he built a full-scale yacht house with enough space to store multiple boats and house staff. The man was creating an entire castle complex, a kingdom in miniature. The construction consumed him. George would take the train up from New York every chance he got to oversee the progress. Louise would weigh in on every interior detail. What wood for the grand staircase? Oak, obviously hand-carved. What style for the library? Something that felt both scholarly and cozy. The billiard room needed the finest table money could buy. The master bedroom suite needed to be perfect. Every tile, every window, every door handle was chosen with care. The plan was to surprise Louise. The whole thing was going to be a gift. George was going to present her with a completed castle on Valentine's Day, 1904. Can you imagine? 4 years of construction, millions of dollars, hundreds of workers, all leading up to one moment where he'd hand her the keys to her own castle and say, "Here, this is how much I love you. This is what you mean to me." Spring 1903. The castle is rising. The stone walls are up. The towers are taking shape. Workers are everywhere, racing to meet the deadline. George is checking progress reports, approving invoices, making sure everything is on schedule. Louise is in New York, probably making notes about furniture and fabrics, planning how they'll spend their summers on their heart-shaped island. And then, January 1904, George receives a telegram at the Waldorf Astoria. Louise is ill. Come quickly. The details are sparse because George never talked about it publicly afterward. But we know this. Louise Boldt died suddenly at age 41. The cause was likely heart-related, though records from that era are frustratingly vague. One day she was planning their future in the castle. The next day she was gone. George Boldt, the man who'd built an empire on making people feel special, who'd climbed from dishwasher to hotel magnate, who'd reshaped an island into a heart for his wife, sent a telegram of his own to the construction site. 4 words: stop all construction immediately. And they did. 300 workers put down their tools, left the scaffolding up, left materials where they lay, walked off the island, and George Boldt never returned. Not once, not ever. For the remaining 14 years of his life, George refused to set foot on Hart Island. The castle sat there, 80% complete, a monument to a love story that ended mid-sentence. Think about that for a second. You spend millions of dollars. 4 years of planning and construction. You're months away from completion, and you just walk away. You don't finish it. You don't sell it. You don't tear it down. You just leave it there, frozen in time, as a massive stone reminder of the exact moment your heart broke. But here's where the story gets darker, because George didn't just abandon the castle. He abandoned the dream. He threw himself into work even harder than before, took on more hotels, made even more money. But the light was gone. People who knew him said he was never the same. How could he be? The person he'd built everything for was gone. George died in 1916, and you might think that's where the story ends. Man builds castle for wife. Wife dies. Man dies. Castle sits empty. The end. Except it's not the end, because what happened next turned Boldt Castle from a personal tragedy into a very public ruin. For 73 years, the castle just sat there, empty, exposed to the elements, no maintenance, no protection, just 4 acres of gradually decaying grandeur in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. And here's the thing about abandoned buildings: nature doesn't care about your romantic gestures. Water seeped through the roof, ice expanded in the cracks, windows broke, wood rotted, vandals showed up and stripped anything valuable: copper, fixtures, anything that could be pried loose. By the 1960s, Boldt Castle had become a genuinely dangerous ruin. Floors had collapsed, staircases had given way, the grand ballroom George had planned for dancing was open to the sky. The powerhouse was a shell, the yacht house was a skeleton. It looked like a bombing target, except the only bomb was time and neglect. Locals would boat out there on dares. Teenagers would break in and party. Photographers would document the decay. It became this weird monument to Victorian heartbreak, this cautionary tale about what happens when love and money collide with mortality. People started calling it the saddest building in America. But here's where the story takes a turn, because in 1977, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority took ownership of the property. And someone had an idea. What if we restored it? What if we took this monument to abandonment and turned it back into what it was supposed to be? Not for George and Louise, obviously, but for the public. A testament to their love story, yes, but also a functional piece of history. The restoration has been ongoing for almost 50 years now. Millions of dollars invested, craftsmen brought in to recreate the hand-carved details, stonemasons repairing walls, the grand staircase rebuilt to original specifications, the ballroom roofed and restored, the powerhouse brought back to life. It's been painstaking work because you're not just fixing a building, you're resurrecting a dream. Today, Boldt Castle is open to visitors. You can walk through those halls George planned, stand in the bedroom he designed for Louise, look out from the towers at the view they would have shared. The Ulster Tower is accessible. The yacht house has been restored. Over 200,000 people visit every year, making it one of the most popular tourist attractions in upstate New York. But here's what gets me. When you visit, you can still see the line, the exact point where construction stopped in 1904. There are sections where the stone changes, where old work meets new restoration. It's like a scar on the building itself, marking the moment heartbreak froze everything in place. The contractors doing the restoration kept it visible on purpose, because erasing it would erase the truth of what happened here. And that's what makes Boldt Castle more than just another rich person's summer home. It's a time capsule of human emotion frozen in stone. Every tower George built was a promise. Every room Louise planned was a future they'd never have. Every detail, every carving, every careful choice was an act of love that ended mid-gesture. You want to know the really haunting part? The castle was designed to be a gift. Louise never knew it existed. George kept it secret. She died not knowing that on some island in the St. Lawrence, her husband was building her a castle. All that work, all that love, all that money, and she never got to see it. Never walked through those halls, never looked out from those towers, never danced in that ballroom. George Boldt's story is the American dream taken to its logical conclusion. Come to America with nothing. Work impossibly hard. Build an empire. Achieve wealth beyond imagination, and then discover that money can't buy the one thing you want most. It can't stop telegrams. It can't reverse time. It can't bring back the person who made it all worthwhile. The castle still sits on its heart-shaped island, still stands as testimony to what one man would do for the woman he loved, but it also stands as a reminder that some stories don't get happy endings, that sometimes the grandest gestures arrive too late, that sometimes love builds monuments to its own impossibility. They say that on quiet evenings, when the last tour groups have left and the sun sets over the St. Lawrence, you can stand in that restored ballroom and almost hear the music that was never played. The laughter that never echoed through those halls. The life that was supposed to fill those 120 rooms. George spent 4 years building a dream. The dream died in a day. But the castle? The castle has stood for 120 years, waiting, first in ruin, now in restoration, still waiting for George and Louise to arrive, to throw open those doors, to begin the life they planned. They never came, but 1 million visitors have walked through their unfinished love story, touched those stone walls, climbed those towers, and stood in those gardens. In a weird way, the tragedy gave the castle an immortality that a happy ending never could have. If George and Louise had lived there, it would have just been another millionaire's summer home. But this became legend. Boldt Castle stands as the most expensive monument to heartbreak ever built, a $200 million Valentine that arrived a century late, the ultimate symbol of both the American dream's possibility and its limitations. You can build a castle, you can reshape an island, you can create beauty that lasts generations. But you can't stop time, you can't negotiate with fate, and you definitely can't finish a dream after its purpose walks away. That's the real story of Boldt Castle, not just the tragedy of George and Louise Boldt, though that's heartbreaking enough, but the bigger tragedy of what happens when our grandest gestures arrive too late, when our most careful plans meet chaos, when love builds something beautiful and then walks away, leaving the rest of us to wonder what could have been. The castle still waits on its heart-shaped island, still incomplete in all the ways that matter, still the most beautiful, haunting, and devastating monument to love that America has ever produced. And every year, thousands of people take boats out to see it, walk through its restored halls, and confront the same truth George Boldt learned in 1904. Sometimes the castle isn't enough. Sometimes all the money in the world can't rewrite the ending. Sometimes love builds monuments that stand forever, waiting for a moment that's already passed.